before I tell you about our mission, can anybody tell me what that image is? Does anybody recognize that image? I've amped it up for the presentation. Pale blue dot, thank you. Somebody knows what it is. So pale blue dot is the picture that Carl Sagan requested. So in the last years of Voyager, before it went beyond the point where we couldn't get stuff back, at the point where Earth was going to be a pixel on an image, he asked them to turn the camera around to look back at Earth from the deepness of space. And this is the picture that they took. It's called Pale Blue Dot. And the reason I like it, and the reason it's such a powerful picture for me, is it captures what mission is all about. If you think about the universe of things that we could do as a company, it is vast. There are so many different problems that need solving. There are so many different ways you can improve and change the world. That said, your mission is hugely important. It is the entire planet for the people in it. And so that image is both a sense of the vastness of space and how insignificant we actually are as our little blue planet, but also recognizing that one pixel captures 7 billion people and all of their hopes and dreams. So when we think about the mission of our company and when we think about Culture First, we actually have to start with what does our company stand for and what are we trying to do? And at Culture Amp, I'm adding 2 zeros to what you said at the start. At Culture Amp, our mission is to create a better world of work and to do that by amplifying the experience and impact of 100 million people, which is roughly 1% of the world's population. So we're at about the 4 to 5 million mark now in terms of who we work with. We've got another 5 years worth of work to get to that point, and then we'll set ourselves another goal. But that's the why of Culture Amp. That's our one mission. This is really slow. Oh, now I'm going that way. Let's see, back. Here we go. And what do we actually do? What does Culture Amp actually do? So we have one platform. It's a Culture Amp, is a technology company. And what we do with our software is we make it easier for people to collect data across the employee experience. So everywhere that you can understand the experience that your people are having, we help you collect that data. We combine that data to drive insight, and we use that insight to help you do positive behavior change. Because at the end of the day, all the data in the world is not going to help if you actually don't make a difference, if you can't change the way people are acting on a day-to-day basis. And so that's really what we focus on. And who we want trying to do it for is for all people in all companies globally. So a small little thing that we're shooting towards. It's going to take us a while. But it's this idea that the core of what Culture Amp does, we're not trying to be the smartest people in the room. There is decades worth of research on how to help people be successful at work. The problem is most of it is not being used. And so we really see our lens as being able to make that accessible, take that research, take that insight, and get it into the hands of not only more companies, but more people inside those companies. So that's who we are, and that's what we do. We now work with about 2,500 companies around the world, companies of all sizes and shapes. We work from very small, sort of 20, 30, 40 person companies, all the way up to 120,000 person companies. Most of the AFL, Cirque du Soleil, Pixar. We work with the All Blacks. We work with all these amazing companies that are thinking about culture. And that's why I'm here to talk to you today, because we study companies that put culture first, and we also study companies that don't. And we've learned some things along the way, and I want to share that with you today. So going back to the lens I said at the start, what I'm hoping is that no matter where you're at in your journey at the moment, whether you're trying to find a company that you want to work for and you care about the culture of that organization, whether you're a person that's inside a company that's thinking about, I care about the culture, but I don't know how to influence it, or whether you're somebody who's leading that company and you're going, I know this culture thing's really important, but I don't really know how to drive it. I want to give you all something that you can take away from this presentation. All right, what does Culture First look like? What's the core idea? I'm going to spend the rest of the presentation diving into the detail, but the core idea is that at its heart, it's a commitment to amplifying what people are not only capable of being, but capable of achieving. How many people in the room are familiar with the concept of growth and fixed mindsets? Most of the room, cool. It's essentially the same idea. You know, the core of a growth versus fixed mindset is, I can be better. I'm not perfect, but I can be better. And so when we think about what a culture-first organization is, at its heart, it's that everyone in the organization believes this. And they believe it about the company, but they also believe it about each other. And it's incredibly easy for us to fall into traps where this is not true. So how many people in the room have had to fire someone? Wow, experienced room. If you think back, particularly to the first time you had to fire someone, it's an awful experience. It's an awful thing to have to go through. And the thing that is so difficult when you go through that is there was a period leading up to that point when you believed in that person. Hopefully. And then there was a point where you lost faith. And one of the challenges when you put people on PIPs and other sorts of things where you're trying to help them get back is that if you fundamentally don't believe that they can make it, they won't. You won't let them. Your own expectation will frame the environment that they're in. This is a fixed mindset. It is really hard to get to the point where you go, even though I've seen all this evidence to the contrary, I think there is a way that you can grow. Now, don't get me wrong. There is a lot of times where somebody needs to leave the organization. So I'm not saying people can't be fired in a culture-first organization, but I'm saying we have to constantly challenge ourselves in terms of why we're doing it and what we've done in the lead-up. And most importantly, when we do end up having to fire somebody, we recognize that the fault is just as much ours as it is theirs. You know, I say inside Culture Amp, anytime someone leaves in the first year, whether they choose to leave or we exit them, it is our fault. It's our fault for not picking that up earlier on. It's our fault for not supporting them. It's our fault for not getting them to the point where they could be successful. Doesn't mean they're a fit for the company, but it's our fault. All right. Why does this matter? Why does it matter to have a growth mindset around people? It matters because the world of work has changed. Back in 1938, Henry Ford said, "Why is it when all I want is a pair of hands, I get a brain attached?" And that was the prevailing world of work. That was Taylorism. That was the scientific revolution within the manufacturing environment. And it was this idea that at the end of the day, you just had to measure everything and force people to meet certain standards, and you would get certain outcomes. And there wasn't the opportunity for people to contribute beyond that. I would posit that everyone in this room is being hired or is working for their brains, not their hands. And even if you are using your hands today, whether it's artisanal production or anything else like that, it's increasingly high cognitive load work. And so the environment that we're bringing people into is different than it has always been before. And it's not a presentation that I'm going to give today, but one that I like to talk about is I actually think the whole generational thing's a complete load of junk. It's a cohort effect. People's expectations change. If you look at the data, a 20-year-old today is pretty much exactly the same, has pretty much exactly the same set of expectations as a 20-year-old did 40 years ago. The only real difference is a slight increase in narcissism. That's measured. Everything else is pretty much the same. And when we talk about the way we need to build companies to be successful, and if you've read Dan Pink's Drive and he talks about autonomy and mastery and purpose, this is not because we're hiring Gen X or Gen Y or millennials or Gen Z or whatever. It's because the work has changed. And we actually do ourselves a disservice by thinking that we have to change to meet the needs of these young people coming into our companies, when it doesn't matter whether you're 15 or 50, to be successful, you need a different environment. And if we look at it from the financial lens, this is a chart of tangible versus intangible asset backing of the S&P 500. So how do we value the companies that build up our economy? Back in 1975, 83% of the value of the company was tangible. It was inventory, it was cash, it was factories, it was machines, it was all of these sorts of things. Now, this was 2005 and it would have continued to go, it's 20%. So the value in our companies is no longer in the things that we count around us, it's in the people and the things they create. And what's so important when we think about this is brand and culture are a huge part of that intangible value. And if brand is a promise to a customer, culture is how you deliver that promise. So culture is a fundamental lever in building a successful organization today. So, what does it look like? What does a culture-first organization look like? This is not necessarily like a scientific framework. This is more of an ethos that we've observed in the companies that are successful and not successful, and many companies can be both, in building culture-first organizations. And so we see there are three pillars. A culture-first organization is one where the culture is foundational. It literally comes first. People ask me, what does culture first mean? I'm like, it means culture comes first. It's a very powerful but simple concept. And it's there whether we're conscious of it or not. And what I want to talk to you today about is how do we be intentional about culture and not just let it happen. The second thing is, if you've got this concept of a foundational culture, is that it's relational. Culture comes alive in the way we interact with each other. And every person in the company has a part to play in shaping that culture. And that leads me to the last part, which is that it actually literally needs to be alive. It needs to be something that we care for and something that we think about. And it's not just what happens, but why and how. So I'm going to walk you through these in a little bit more detail. When we think about foundational, the starting point, which probably won't be new for many of you, is this idea of values. The values you have in your organization are foundational, but it's really interesting to think about the fact that we don't just create values, those values actually create us. So this is this quote that first we shape our values and then our values shape us. And this is important. Who's seen As Good as It Gets with Helen Hunt and Jack Nicholson? About half the room. It's an old movie, so 15 years ago. And Jack Nicholson is an actor, he's a writer, and he suffers from a whole range of issues. And he meets Helen Hunt, and they get into this relationship, and he's honestly just a complete tool in the way he interacts with her. And at a certain point, she just throws her hands up and says, "Why are we doing this? Like, I'm trying to help you, and you're not interested. Just go away. Stop making my life so hard." And he looks at her, and he says, "Because you make me want to be a better man." And what a great culture does, what the values of a great organization do, is they awaken something inside you. You hear the ethos of the organization, and it makes you want to be a better version of yourself. It doesn't want to make you be a better version of someone else. It makes you better be a version of who you want to be. And you see something in that company that you know if you're in that company for long enough, you will be that person that you want to be. So the first thing is values-led. And it's really interesting to think about the values you have in your company and how those things have that effect or don't have that effect on you. What is it about those values that inspire you? And if you have good values, if you have strong values, you also have to be aware that values have both a golden side and a shadow side. And the golden side is the power. So at Culture Amp, our first value is have the courage to be vulnerable. It's an incredibly powerful value. It draws heavily upon the work of Brené Brown and a lot of other people in terms of the power of vulnerability in creating trust and in building an environment where we can be our best, and it's very core to the whole growth mindset. But it also has a shadow side. And the shadow side of that, at Culture Amp, can be oversharing. And it sounds kind of funny, but it's this idea that you have this trust line that you're pushing, and sometimes people will be in a situation where they feel like they need to tell somebody something, but that person's not equipped to take that at that time. And so when you're doing it well, when you're really thinking intentionally about building a culture-first organization, you have to understand it, and you have to have those conversations with people. So I would encourage you to think about in your own organizations or in the organizations you're observing, not just which are the values that are really powerful that you really like, but what happens when they get overplayed. Because the thing to remember, this is a strength being overplayed that becomes a weakness. And at its worst, this becomes values being weaponized. So inside the organization, in the name of that value, people are doing behavior that they shouldn't be doing, but they're using the value to cover it. And creating an environment where you can have that conversation around you're weaponizing that value. That's not how that's meant to be used. This is incredibly important. It's what we see in culture-first companies. And last but not least, and it's actually a combination of the first two, a culture-first organization uses its values to drive purposeful energy. And so this concept comes from a book by Jim Loehr called The Power of Full Engagement. And he talks about that he studied particularly tennis players, but a lot of sports people, and he was talking about how they become successful. And I won't try and summarize the whole book. It's an excellent book with a terrible cover and a terrible title. But what he gets into is that the real art is not managing time, but managing energy. And we have 4 different types of energy. We have physical, we have emotional, we have mental, and we have spiritual or purposeful. And that's where you go when you're having a really, really bad day. When everything is going the wrong way, when you've lost a major client, or there's stuff in your own personal life that's making it really hard to attend to what's going on in the workplace. Purposeful energy is what you get from your values and from the core of the business that you draw upon. Why do you care about the values of your organization, and how are they there for you when you need to draw upon them, when you need them the most? So, the foundation of a culture-first organization is these 3 things. It's values-led. Those values shape the experiences that you have, and they shape the person that you become. They understand the golden and the shadow side of those values, and they're there to deliver purposeful energy to people in its pursuit. All right, what happens next? The first and most important thing, and this still actually relates back to values, is this concept of mutuality. So when you think about a good value, like have the courage to be vulnerable, it has a mutual component. So it doesn't just tell you what the organization will do for you, it tells you what the organization demands of you. So I encourage you to think about the values frameworks of your organizations. What not just what does it create, but what does it require? And there was never a truer word spoken, and I can say this across thousands of companies, then culture is not HR's problem to fix. It is all of ours. It is everybody's. And the very first and most important thing that you see in a culture-first company is that the overwhelming number of people in that company want to step up and be part of that. They understand that they have a role to play in framing the culture that they're in. And if you have that, then you can start to think about accountability. And accountability is a way overused word in the business world. Accountability generally means do the thing I told you you had to do or you lose your job. Accountability as a powerful concept is much more than that. And I actually love this quote by Tom Landry. A coach is someone who tells you what you don't want to hear, who has you see what you don't want to see, so you can be who you've always known you could be. And it's that last part that is the hard part. It is really, really hard to go and have a difficult conversation with somebody, to sit down and say, you know what, you're actually not delivering at the level that you need to, or you need to understand the consequence or the way you're acting is having, the impact it's having on other people. They're hard conversations. It's even harder to do that by thinking about what that person wants to be, where that person's trying to go, not just where you think they need to be. And so what we see in organizations that are successful in building culture-first environments is that they weave this concept into the way they do everything. And it's not that I'm accountable for you or I'm your coach. These can happen in many different ways on different topics. You could be my coach on one topic and I can be your coach on another topic. And the challenge to all of you is, actually I'll ask, how many people in the room think they have somebody who can be this for them? Is there anybody? Okay. How many people in the room feel they are this for someone else? Okay, I want to go talk to all of you because this is really hard. And if you're doing this well, this is the foundation of an amazing company. And it's not something, I've done this many times, and I would normally see about a third of the room on the first question, and 2 people put their hand up and then hide it because nobody else is doing it. So we're obviously in an enlightened room. And then last but not least, if you're thinking about relational, you have to think about difference. And the data is really interesting. So when you look at teams and the data on teams, the highest performing teams are diverse teams. So are the lowest performing ones. And if you look at preference, people prefer to be in teams that are less diverse, which kind of sounds weird, but it's not that people want to live in a less diverse world, it's just that it's hard. You slow down. You can't do things in the way that you've always done them before. And when you think about what a culture-first company means and what we've seen in the companies that we work with who do this well, is they're willing to take the pain. You have to accept that difference is something that matters to creating a powerful company. It's something that creates resilience. It's something that creates adaptability. But it does not come for free, and it is not easy, and you have to be willing to put in a ton of effort for it to work. And I know Don Price was up speaking this morning. I don't know if he said this, but something he said in one of his earlier presentations, he spoke at our Culture First Global that I loved, was he said, if you're going to spend $1 on diversity, then you have to reserve $2 for inclusion. Otherwise, don't bother spending the first $1. These are really difficult and important things that we have to work on. So that's the relational part. What we're seeing is that those companies that are really successful at building culture-first organizations do it by helping people understand their role, what's the mutual requirement and the mutual observation. They do it by knitting accountability into the way people work with each other. And they do it by understanding how they're going to accept the pain and the gain of focusing on difference. And if you do that, then you can focus on bringing it alive. And one of the most interesting conversations when you talk about a culture-first company, in a culture-first company, culture is how you win, not an alternate win. So sometimes people sit down and say, well, do we want to be culture-first or do we want to win? Because it's the ruthless, evil bastards that win. This is not true, particularly not over the long run. So we work with Pixar, we work with Cirque du Soleil, we work with All Blacks, and we're just about to win another company that I can't claim, but they're also in the same realm. And the thing that fascinates me about all of them is not only do they perform at a very high level, they've been performing at a very high level for decades. And when you want to perform at a very high level for decades, that requires you to build a culture that produces those outcomes. You can't force your way to an outcome in a given year. You can't beat people till you get there because you'll just not get back the next year. And so culture-first companies understand that the culture has to be how they win. It's not a willingness to say, oh, look, winning doesn't matter, we're a culture-first company, we just want to have a nice time. It's, we want to win just as much as the next person, but we're only willing to win a certain way, because we're in this for the long run, and that matters to us more than the score on any given Sunday. The flip side to that is you not only win, but you also lose. So what is it that's wrong in your organization? Are you willing to hold up a mirror and be accountable for what you see? There is no such thing as a perfect culture. That's a cult. A perfect or a great culture is one that says, this is working, this is not working, this is what we're doing to fix it, this is what we're worried about, these are things we need to do better, and you share that. It's a willingness to have that out in the open and to be able to explore that with people so that you can make it better. And lastly, it's about acceptance. And acceptance sounds simple, but it's actually not. Is anyone familiar with radical acceptance and Marshall Linehan? This is a great room. I did this in front of about 1,500 people in San Francisco, and there was only 5, and one of them was my wife. So not many, and she told me about Marshall Linehan. So radical acceptance is this concept of, if you want to change anything, you actually have to start by accepting where you are. And there's a lot more to it than that, but that's the first piece. And the reason I chose this picture, I found it when I was preparing the deck, and I love it, because when we talk about culture and we talk about what we're trying to build, we keep thinking we're building those 3 guys up on the wall, Messi and Ronaldo. They don't exist. And if you ever met them, they are not that either. Those people in the front, that is us. That's who we're building for. These people have had richer and more powerful and interesting lives than those 3 images up on the wall. And when we're thinking about building a culture, we have to be real. We have to accept. We can't live in a world of shoulds. We can't live in a world of, oh, well, it would be really good if we could do this thing over here. Once again, this is from my wife, and she shared this idea with me, like a should needs to become a must, or a will, or it needs to go away. We spend so much of our life worried about trying to be something that somebody else is. A great company is one that is willing to say, this is what we are. This is why we are this. This is what we want to be, and we're doing this with real humans in real lives and all of the things that they're doing. We're not just a fantasy that's put up on the wall. And if you pull all that together, that's a culture-first organization. It's one that has the right foundations. It's one that is values-led, that understands how those values can be used to help, but also to harm. It understands how to draw upon those for purposeful energy. It understands our intersections, how we work together. It understands what it means to build accountability into helping people be the person they want to be, helping them grow, and how to create an environment of difference. This is really, really, really difficult. I mean, one of my observations on having gone on this journey through Culture Amp and seeing it with our own customers is that the thing, if you're trying to take on diversity as an outcome, is there is no finish line. You start by going, hey, our gender imbalance is kind of crap, so you improve that and you're like, wow, that's one dimension. What about other dimensions? What about race? What about places that other people come from? One place that the Valley, for example, still sucks at is age discrimination, but also just age diversity. There is none. There's a sort of running around thing of a picture saying, hey, I've got a diverse organization. I have the Stanford class of 2015, the Stanford class of 2014, and the Stanford class of 2013. So it doesn't matter where you are, there is always a new dimension that you have not yet explored, that you are probably inadvertently creating walls to protect. You then need to think about, what does it mean to win? How does your culture help you win? You actually have to talk about winning. It is important. Otherwise, you won't build a successful business. And then you have to be willing to say that you don't always win. In fact, you lose probably more than you win, but you learn more from those losses than you do from the wins. And lastly, you have to start with where people are. You have to accept who they are. You have to accept who they're capable of becoming. And you have to build your organization off the back of that. And if you do all of that, then you are a culture-first organization. And I leave you with a thought. This is a picture of my dog, Zubin, waiting for dinner. Believe it or not, he was fed 5 minutes before, and he can still pull off that face. But we borrow our time at work from things much more important than the work is. Could be our children, could be our family, could be our dogs or cats. It could be something else in your life that is important to you. I can guarantee you that there are things that are more important to you than your work. There has to be. Which means the work bloody well better matter. Because otherwise, why aren't you doing that? Why aren't you spending time with them? I'm a workaholic, and this is still true. At the end of the day, it is more important for me to spend time with those people than it is to be at work. So when I am at work, it needs to matter. It needs to be meaningful. We are the lucky people. When we talk about work, we're talking about the top of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There's a whole bunch of people out in the world who don't have that luxury. We do. We need to use it, and we need to use it in powerful ways. So I leave you with that thought. I leave you with the thought that work needs to matter. I see a room of people that care about culture, and it is daunting and it is hard to build a culture-first organization. It's a lot of steps, but it's worthwhile. It's the only thing, I believe, ultimately that matters when you're building a company, is not just what did you achieve, but what is the culture that you left behind? What is the culture you created in pursuit of that vision?